Hey guys, tonight we step into a dimly lit Victorian sick room where the heavy velvet drapes are drawn against damp November air and a single brass-framed oil lamp casts wavering amber light across rosewood furniture. You sink into an overstuffed armchair, the upholstery's floral pattern soft beneath you, and inhale the sweet medicinal aroma of camphor and lavender remnants of last night's poultices and yesterday's inhalations. But don't be fooled by the genteel calm. You probably won't drift off until you've explored the era's strangest and often surprisingly effective health cures. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please drop your location and local time in the comments below so we can see how far our Victorian circle of curious minds stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Across from you, a polished side table bears an array of curious vessels, delicate apothecary jars, slender glass vials, and stout stoneware crocks, each labeled in flowing copperplate script, Digitalis, from Foxglove Radium-Infused Waters, cocaine, elixir, arsenic, white pills, electric health belt. These aren't mere relics of quackery, but bona fide breakthroughs that shaped modern medicine, sometimes through noble intent, sometimes by accident. Mainstream medical journals of the late 19th century heralded Digitalis extracted from foxglove as a cardiac tonic capable of steadying erratic heartbeats and saving lives in congestive heart failure. Yet fringe whispers from private letters recall patients who, after a few doses, claimed to see everything tinged with golden halos, a side effect so vivid that some doctors cautioned patients to step away from gaslight lamps lest furniture appear to blossom with luminous petals. You lean forward as a soft knock comes at the door, but it's only the maid delivering a steaming pot of chamomile infusion, a gentle counterpoint to the stronger remedies on display. In mainstream Victorian households, herbal teas were everyday comforts for mild indigestion or sleeplessness. Yet in this peculiar age, families often combined chamomile with a splash of laudanum to lull restless children and occasionally overworked governesses into a drowsy stupor. A curious footnote in a nanny's diary grumbles that small doses of laudanum sometimes left her charges quoting Shakespeare at dawn charming until they recited Macbeth at breakfast. Scholars still debate whether laudanum-laced teas were widespread domestic practice or confined to affluent households with more adventurous apothecaries. Above the mantel, an ornate cast-iron fireplace crackles with coal embers, their warmth coaxing the sick room's chill away. On the hearth sits a small metal casket housing mustard plaster, an age-old poultice composed of ground mustard seed mixed into a paste and applied to the chest or back to relieve chest congestion. Mainstream Victorian medical guides recommended mustard plasters for bronchitis and pneumonia, praising their counter-irritant effect to draw blood and break up phlegm. Yet a quirky anecdote in a country doctor's notebook warns that overzealous application left some patients with mustard blistered backs, resembling spotted Dalmatians, hardly the look one intended when seeking a remedy for a mere cough. Historians still argue whether such mustard-induced blisters were considered acceptable collateral or largely avoidable with more careful dilution. Beside the fireplace, a brass rack holds several leather-bound volumes of home medical encyclopedias. You pick up an atlas of spa cures and turn to the entry on radium waters. In mainstream spa towns like Bath in England or Spa in Belgium, radium-infused spring water, prized for its gentle radioactivity, was bottled and sold as a cure for arthritis, anemia, and general fatigue. Physicians touted the element's mysterious vital spark as naturally energizing, recommending daily soaks in radium baths. Yet fringe reports from letters by long-term patrons describe sudden nosebleeds or hair loss, early hints that too much radioactivity could harm more than heal. Scientists of the era themselves were divided. Some embraced radium's promise, while others warned of its hidden dangers. Scholars still debate whether early medical radium spas conducted sufficient safety assessments or rushed treatments in the fervor of the radiant age. You settle back as the maid places a small glass of foamy porter on a side table. Victorian doctors often prescribed small pints of stout or porter as blood tonics, mainstream practice, backed by medical treatises that lauded brewers' yeast and iron content for anemic patients. Farmers recovering from exhausting work found fortification in their beer steins, and even soldiers on campaign carried small kegs for morale and purported health benefits. Yet an apocryphal note in a brewer's ledger jokes that one ale called Mendwell's Porter cured so many ailments that it nearly depleted barley supplies, prompting a rationing order. Historians still argue whether beer tonics were genuinely efficacious or served more as calorie-rich comfort foods clothed in medical rhetoric. Adjacent to the porter, you notice a small wooden box etched with the words "Electric Health Belt." In mainstream Victorian electrotherapy, physicians applied mild electric currents via belts or handheld electrodes to treat rheumatism, muscle weakness, and nervous disorders. Patients reported tingling warmth and temporary pain relief, prompting widespread adoption of home electrotherapy devices. Yet a fringe account in a technician's scrapbook recalls a demonstration where an enthusiastic inventor's belt malfunctioned, delivering a noxious jolt that sent his petticoat-clad assistant dancing a jig of shock. Scholars still debate whether such mishaps were rare engineering glitches or symptomatic of overzealous experimentation in early electrical medicine. The lamp's glow flickers as you raise the chamomile tea, its gentle warmth soothing your fingertips. In this strange assortment of bottles and belts, poultices and powders, you glimpse the Victorian mind's thirst for innovation, willing to harness poisons, parasites, and even electricity to conquer illness. Each remedy carried risks and rewards, whispered successes, and recorded misadventures, all chronicled in the annals of medical history. As the embers settle and shadowed corners deepen, you sense the hush of healing rituals past, settling over the room, a lullaby of crackling fire, soft voices, and the promise of relief. Because for Victorians, every strange cure was more than an eccentric experiment. It was a beacon of hope against disease's darkness, a testament to human ingenuity, and a quiet reassurance that even the oddest potion might hold the power to mend the broken body. You settle deeper into the velvet armchair as the fire's glow flickers across the sickroom walls, and your gaze drifts to a stout apothecary jar labeled Digitalis Tincture Foxglove. A delicate sprig of dried foxglove, its tubular blossoms now brittle and brown, sits atop a folded linen square beside a gleaming silver spoon. Here, amid the hush of crackling coals and muted ticking of a mantel clock, another Victorian marvel unfolds, because now it is time for Digitalis from Foxglove. By the mid-19th century, mainstream medical journals and respected physicians hailed Digitalis, a cardiac glycoside extracted from the purple foxglove plant, as a life-saving remedy for dropsy, what we now call congestive heart failure. In ward rounds at London's St. Bartholomew's Hospital, doctors noted that patients with swollen ankles and labored breathing often experienced marked relief. Their pulses steadied, fluid accumulation receded, and shortness of breath eased enough to allow a comfortable night's sleep. You lift the silver spoon and measure a few drops of the tincture into a small porcelain cup, noting its amber hue, the result of foxglove leaves steeped in alcohol for weeks. The attending physician, a stern figure in a frock coat, murmurs your dose formula. Begin with 1 drop per hour. Increasing, gradually watch for nausea or visual disturbances. He cites mainstream practice drawn from William Withering's landmark 1785 publication, which first documented foxglove's effects on heart disease. You swallow the bitter liquid, feeling a slight warmth as it slides down your throat. Soon in your imagination, your pulse smooths like a river at dawn. Yet alongside the measured praise lies a quirkier fringe detail. Some domestic apothecaries once recommended adorning foxglove pots with little brass halo rings, believing the plant's vapors mixed with ether lamps might help open the heart's inner chambers. A gossip-flavored note in a rural midwife's diary warns that one enthusiastic but unqualified practitioner accidentally gave a patient a poultice of foxglove leaves applied to the temples, mistaking it for valerian, resulting in hours of delirious visions of dancing butterflies. Historians still argue whether such vapor-based applications ever gained any real traction or were merely idiosyncratic experiments by overzealous amateurs. As the tincture's warmth settles, you lean back and feel the room's hush deepen. Outside, the November wind rattles window panes. Inside, the steady flicker of coal embers feels like a cradle rock. Mainstream physicians taught that Digitalis's therapeutic window was narrow. Too little did nothing. Too much caused toxicity, so dosing required care. Common side effects included fatigue, headache, and nausea, all recorded dutifully in hospital registers. But the most striking symptom, specific to Digitalis, was xanthopsia, a yellow-tinged view of the world. Some patients later recalled seeing gaslight lamps glowing with uncanny warmth, as though the very walls bloomed with golden petals. The physician pauses by the fireplace finger on his lip and confides, "I've read patient letters describing Foxglove patients convinced they spoke to angels bathed in golden auras all before midday. Yet most return to normal vision once dosages stabilized." This scholarly debate, whether xanthopsia stemmed purely from Digitalis's pharmacology or mixed with Victorian gaslight's optical quirks, remains unsettled among medical historians. Beyond hospital walls, Foxglove tincture found its way into many a household medicine chest. Mainstream domestic guides advise tea made from dried leaves. Stronger doses reserved for hospital use to relieve palpitations and high blood pressure. Yet a surviving recipe in a gentlewoman's commonplace book warns use only the purple blossoms, not the mottled lower leaves, a fringe distinction suggesting some believed plant parts varied in potency. Scholars still argue whether selective harvesting was a common folk practice or prompted by early botanical taxonomies rather than empirical evidence. You set the empty cup aside as the attending nurse enters, bringing a linen cloth dampened with cool water. She dabs your forehead and murmurs, "Rest now. The foxglove will do its work." As she adjusts your pillows, you feel the medicine's promise surge through the room's quiet, a hush charged with hopeful anticipation. Yet Victorian cautionary tales abound. A street corner advert from 1872 boasts of Dr. Fairbanks's foxglove curative, promising rapid relief of heart woes. But a fringe notice in the Lancet's letters section lambasted such patent medicines for imprecise concentrations, some bottles containing barely a trace of Digitalis, while others reached lethal potency. Scholars still debate the extent of unregulated foxglove sales and how many lives these quack cures cost before regulatory standards emerged. As evening deepens tonight, you feel a gentle slowing of your pulse, your breathing softening as if foxglove's magic already stitches your heart's frayed edges. The lamp's glow warms your vision, lending the room a honeyed tint. Outside, the wind hushes. Inside, the creak of settling wood and distant footfalls ground you in the humble splendor of Victorian healing. Because for Victorians, Digitalis from Foxglove was not mere botanical curiosity. It was a potent fusion of science and nature, a precarious lifesaver wielded by cautious hands, and a reminder that even deadly plants can become powerful allies in the relentless fight against disease. Stepping from the foxglove's golden haze, you find yourself in a grand marble-tiled corridor lined with brass-trimmed fountains whose basins shimmer with pale radioactive waters. Soft blue phosphorescence dances beneath the surface, casting spectral ripples on the vaulted ceiling. Here, amid hushed murmurs of hopeful spa patrons and the faint hum of Geiger counters ticking in the background. Another marvel of Victorian medicine awaits, because now it is time for radium-infused waters. By the late 19th century, radium, Marie and Pierre Curie's stunning discovery of a new element, had captured the world's imagination. Mainstream medical journals and spa promoters alike declared radium-infused spring water a panacea cures for arthritis, anemia, chronic fatigue, and even cancer were touted in lavish brochures. You approach one of the fountains, where attendants in crisp white uniforms ladle the glowing liquid into shallow porcelain cups. A placard in elegant script proclaims Montclair Radium Spring, 0.1 CILs revitalize body and spirit. Visitors sip daintily, their faces illuminated in an otherworldly blue. The lead physician at the spa, Dr. Montague Perrin, leans close to you, whispering, "Just a teaspoonful of this daily will invigorate the blood and renew the soul." This mainstream assertion was grounded in early studies showing improved circulation and mood among patients with a drop or two of radium water daily. Noble patrons wrote home that their chronic rheumatism eased their digestion, improved, and their energy soared, accounts repeated in society columns with reverent enthusiasm. Yet in fringe circles, darker tales circulated. A stray entry in a young chemist's notebook, scribbled during a moonlit lab session, warns that prolonged exposure to radon gas, which emanates freely from radium baths, sometimes induced dizzy spells and nosebleeds. Guests at the Montclair Spa reported sudden blushes and strange metallic tastes upon sipping the water, though these were shrugged off as signs of the element's potency rather than toxicity. Historians still argue whether such side effects were isolated curiosities of early radiotherapy or early warnings of deeper radiation dangers later confirmed by 20th century studies. Adjacent to the spring steam rises from a shallow pool where patrons bathe in warm radium-laced water. You dip a finger through the surface and feel a gentle tingle like the soft electric buzz of a mild static shock. The spa's brochure boasts that dermal exposure stimulates skin cell renewal and banishes all manner of cutaneous maladies. Mainstream dermatologists of the era praised radium baths for smoothing wrinkles and alleviating eczema based on anecdotal observations. Yet the spa's own maintenance log reveals that copper piping corroded faster than expected, a fringe hint that radioactivity or perhaps trace acids in the spring ate away at metal. Scholars still debate whether pipe corrosion signaled chemical composition issues or early radiogenic breakdown of infrastructure. You wander past a row of chaise lounges occupied by ladies in voluminous gowns and gentlemen in starched linen, each wrapped in plush towels labeled with the spa's crest. A discreet nurse circulates with small glass inhalers, offering patrons whiffs of radon-enriched vapor, claiming it clears the lungs and eases chronic cough. Mainstream practice, borrowed from Austrian radon galleries in Gastein, where miners inhaled radon gas for respiratory benefit. Yet a cautionary footnote in a Viennese sanatorium's ledger warns that miners sometimes lost their sense of smell permanently after prolonged exposure, an ominous fringe detail prompting debate over safe exposure durations versus therapeutic benefit. Beyond the bathing galleries, you pass a private consultation room where Dr. Perrin greets a bedraggled industrialist suffering from persistent fatigue. He prescribes a regimen of radium water 4 teaspoonfuls before breakfast 3, before dinner, plus 2 daily sessions in the steam bath. The industrialist nods, eager for relief after countless sleepless nights. Mainstream case reports celebrated such protocols, citing restored vigor and improved cardiac function. Yet in undercover correspondence, his family physician fretted over skin ulcerations and persistent nausea that emerged weeks later, an early hint that radium's glow might come with a hidden cost. Historians still argue whether these adverse reports were outliers or the first signals of long-term harm. Not far away, a massive porcelain jar stands labeled Public Radium Trough-Free Sampling. Around it gather curious children and elderly villagers, sipping and laughing at the novelty. Local gossip captured in a County Gazette excerpt suggests that some mischievous teenagers once added a teaspoon of crushed chartreuse to the radium water to create glowing cocktails, though Dr. Perrin sternly prohibited any adulteration. Scholars still debate whether such youthful pranks ever posed real danger or remained harmless fizz in the annals of spa lore. You step outside onto a terrace overlooking manicured gardens under a twilight sky. In the soft blue light, the radium fountains glow like miniature moons. Patrons stroll, discussing improvements in joint pain and mood. One elderly lady, her cheeks aglow, extols the miracle waters that revived her spirit after years of despair. Another gentleman swears they cured his chronic gout, his testimony noted in the spa's promotional pamphlet. Mainstream journals echoed these successes, even as they cautioned that research was ongoing and dosages required precision. Yet an unsettling ledger entry in the spa's private journal marked confidential notes that several staff members developed persistent coughs and unexplained bruising on their forearms, possibly from handling radium vials without adequate shielding. This fringe occupational hazard foreshadows the later discovery of radiation sickness among early radiologists and lab technicians. Historians still debate whether spa workers' ailments were taken seriously at the time or dismissed as coincidental byproducts of long hours on damp floors. As you sip your last drop of radium water beneath the glow of twilight, you feel a curious warmth, both physical and emotional, settle through your limbs. The future promises more cautionary science, yet in this moment, you taste the heady promise of harnessing the atom's power for healing. The lamp's glow mingles with the fountain's blue fire, weaving a dreamscape of scientific daring and human hope. Because for Victorians, radium-infused waters were not mere folly. They were bold experiments at the frontier of medical science, combining radiance and remedy in equal measure and leaving a legacy that still shines and sometimes burns in the story of modern medicine. Dark velvet curtains puff softly against the window frame as you step into a candlelit apothecary alcove, its gilded shelves lined with glass bottles of every shape and hue. The air is tinged with clove oil and the faint sweetness of ethanol. On a central marble counter, a row of delicate phials awaits, each bearing the label Cocaine Elixir in flowing copperplate ink. One rests open, its pale crystalline powder shimmering beneath the lamp's flame. Here, in this hushed sanctuary of Victorian experimentation, another startling chapter of medical daring unfolds, because now it is time for cocaine-laced elixirs. By the late 1800s, cocaine, first isolated from coca leaves in the 1860s, had swiftly become a mainstream remedy in European and American medicine. Physicians lauded its potent local anesthetic properties, heralding its use to numb mucous membranes for dental extractions and throat surgeries without the risks of chloroform or ether. You watch as an apothecary lifts a tiny glass scoop, measures precisely 1 grain's worth of cocaine, hydrochloride about 60 milligrams, and dissolves it in a vial of diluted alcohol water and a drop of tincture of vanilla to mask the bitterness. The resulting elixir glints like liquid crystal. Dr. Henri Beaumont, a distinguished surgeon in pristine linen, picks up a small porcelain spoon and demonstrates. 1 teaspoon of this elixir relieves severe dental pain within minutes with minimal systemic side effects, he explains in a calm baritone. This mainstream medical consensus stemmed from case studies published in The Lancet and the Journal of the American Medical Association, which praised cocaine's ability to produce rapid localized numbness without the deep sedation or respiratory depression common to earlier anesthetics. Yet for all its medical merit, cocaine carried a dangerous fringe reputation. In the back rows of medical student lectures, whispered anecdotes circulated of young practitioners mesmerized by the stimulant's invigorating rush, sipping extra doses to quell their exhaustion during grueling on-call nights. A striking footnote in a junior doctor's diary recalls how one colleague seeking relief from a 10-hour obstetrics shift downed 3 vials of elixir. He then spent the night bounding through corridors in manic energy, convinced he could deliver babies blindfolded. Historians still argue whether such self-experimentation was widespread or sporadic folly among the most overworked. Beyond surgery, Victorian society embraced cocaine as a stimulant tonic. Ladies' magazines featured advertisements for restorative cocaine cordial to cure headaches, depression, and even hay fever. Gentlewomen were encouraged to keep small vials in their reticules for a refreshing nip when fatigue struck. Mainstream pharmacopoeias documented dosages often 5 to 10 milligrams per spoonful up to 3 times daily, while warning that higher doses risked tremors and insomnia. Yet in an apocryphal domestic letter, a lady of leisure recounts her horrified amusement when her maid, seeking to invigorate the mind, accidentally added a full drachm to her tea transforming a genteel afternoon into a jittery scramble of frantic sewing and giggles. Scholars still debate whether upper-class indulgence in cocaine tonics was rampant or confined to novelty experiments among the leisured few. Not far from the cordial station, a cluster of patients reclines on crimson chaise longues, each sipping the pale elixir through silver straws tipped with cotton wadding to filter particulates. One gentleman suffering from chronic migraine cradles his head and speaks of a clear-minded calm an hour after dosing of Fringe Testament, later published in an obscure neurologist's memoir. The common refrain held that cocaine's vasoconstrictive properties relieved migraine pain by narrowing dilated cranial vessels. Yet central nervous system stimulant effects sometimes countered these benefits, triggering rebound headaches in sensitive individuals, a paradox noted in late 19th century drug trials. You lean in as an apothecary modestly demonstrates a nasal insufflation. He folds a delicate paper funnel, places a small pinch of the crystalline powder inside, and inhales sharply. His cheeks flush, eyes brighten, and he exhales. Immediate relief. Pain ceases, senses sharpen. Mainstream surgical texts praised cocaine's nasal application for treating throat and nasal tumors, allowing outpatient procedures previously impossible. Conversely, fringe clinic reports warned of local mucosal ulcerations cases where repeated insufflations had eroded nasal septa. Scholars still debate whether such tissue damage derived from cocaine's direct cytotoxic effects or from the alcohol solvents used in elixirs. In the corner stands a curious device, a smoking pipe wired to a glass bulb containing the elixir and a small spirit lamp. A technician demonstrates cocaine vapor therapy, inhaling wafted fumes to treat chronic bronchitis. Advocates claimed this method delivered rapid relief of bronchospasm, mainstream enough to feature in pulmonary medicine conferences circa 1895. Yet an investigator's report filed with the Royal Society of Medicine describes a patient who after several sessions developed persistent bronchial irritation and early caution that vaporized solvents could aggravate airways. Scholars still debate whether aerosolized cocaine ever truly benefited respiratory patients or served mainly as a novelty cure. Near the alcove's exit, a display lists known side effects: tremor, tachycardia, insomnia, and in extreme cases, psychotic episodes framed as rare occurrences under proper medical supervision. This mainstream reassurance often failed to reach the general public, where sensational fringe reports circulated of an eminent actor who, having prepared for a performance with a cocaine invigoration dose, bizarrely delivered his lines in perfect iambic pentameter, but then collapsed on stage in a grand fit of palpitations. Scholars still argue whether the actor's collapse exemplified genuine adverse reaction or was ladylike exaggeration by tongue-in-cheek theater critics. As you replace the silver spoon, the room's hush deepens, punctuated only by the ticking of an ormolu clock. You feel the cool promise of numbed nerves and alert senses tempered by the era's uncertainty about dependency and toxicity. Victorian pioneers embraced cocaine with enthusiasm and caution in equal measure, transforming a traditional South American leaf into a cornerstone of modern anesthesia and inadvertently into a cautionary tale of medical hubris. Because for Victorians, cocaine-laced elixirs were not merely quack nostrums. They were sophisticated instruments of relief innovations that bridged the worlds of surgery and comfort, bearing both the promise of painless progress and the seed of addiction that would shape the 20th century's approach to controlled substances. The room grows hushed as you glide past the cocaine elixir vials and step into a corner illuminated by a single pale gas lamp. On a polished mahogany sideboard stands a black lacquered box engraved with the words "Arsenic White Pills" for complexion and vitality. You lift the lid to reveal rows of small pearl-like pills, each promising the porcelain skin and rosy cheeks so coveted by Victorian society. Here in this almost sepulchral hush, another daring remedy unfolds, because now it is time for arsenic beauty pills. In mainstream Victorian beauty manuals and women's magazines of the late 19th century, tiny doses of arsenic trioxide, diluted and encapsulated in pill form, were lauded as the secret to a fair, luminous complexion. Dermatologists and fashionable apothecaries recommended courses of arsenic pills, carefully titrated a half grain, about 30 millisieverts once or twice daily, over several weeks. Testimonials in periodicals describe skin clearing of blemishes, a softening of wrinkles, and a vitality that made women glow as if lit from within. The effect was no optical illusion. Arsenic's action on keratinocytes and its mild vasoconstrictive properties temporarily reduced redness and improved skin tone. You place one pill on your palm and note its fine, almost opalescent finish. An elderly matron, dressed in sable and lace, steps forward. "I first tried arsenic pills to banish my freckles," she confides in a low whisper. "After 3 weeks, my skin looked years younger. I felt stronger too, more alert than ever." Her voice quavers between pride and the faintest hint of regret, a nuance echoed in private letters of the era where women celebrated smooth skin but quietly lamented persistent nausea or headaches. Yet alongside this mainstream Vogue fringe, accounts hinted at darker consequences. Medical journals began publishing case reports of chronic arsenic poisoning among beauty pill devotees. Symptoms ranged from gastrointestinal distress and tremors to neuropathy and darkened raindrop freckles, the very blemishes women sought to erase. A lurid footnote in one physician's diary describes a contemptible dealer who peddled double-strength arsenic pills labeled "guaranteed to whiten." In 10 days, their true potency, calculated only by the hastily scrawled epitaphs in local parish registers. Scholars still debate how many women suffered irreversible harm chasing the era's beauty ideal, and whether medical warnings arrived too late to curb widespread use. At your elbow stands a polished silver mirror. You raise an arsenic pill between thumb and forefinger and imagine its arc from mouth to bloodstream, the subtle chemistry that clears epidermal cells even as it edges toward toxicity. The pill's mild bitterness evokes memories of ginger bitters, yet its remarkable efficacy underpinned a lucrative trade. Apothecaries advertised pure English arsenic, pharmaceutical grade, alongside patent face creams and corsetry reinforcing a beauty regime that blended internal poison with external pressure. On the sideboard, a folio of feminine etiquette rests open to the arsenic regime. It details a morning ritual: rise at dawn, consume a glass of spring water infused with lemon, take an arsenic pill, and then apply a nourishing cold cream of beeswax and almond oil. By noon, one was to repeat the pill, followed by a light lunch of poached fish and wilted greens foods, chosen for their gentle digestion, as arsenic's gastric irritant effects necessitated careful diet. In mainstream etiquette, guides this regimen was emphasized as crucial not only for beauty, but for maintaining refined constitution against urban dust and damp. Yet a fringe footnote in a society scandal sheet warns that houses ill-ventilated during arsenic treatments sometimes experienced mysterious pallor spells among servants, likely a result of inhaled arsenic dust from crushed pills. Household accounts from a London townhouse note the family doctor's repeated visits to treat the butler's persistent cough, only for the family to insist the poor man simply indulged too much of the medicine. Historians still debate whether unrecognized occupational exposure among domestic staff contributed significantly to Victorian mortality rates. A discreet vial of protective sulfur sits beside the pills sold as a prophylactic measure. Mainstream pharmacists claimed that co-ingestion of powdered sulfur reduced arsenic's mucosal irritation and chelated excess metal ions. You lift the sulfur powder gritty and pale and mix a pinch into the palm of your hand, studying its crude texture. A nurse apothecary enters to demonstrate her voice, soft. Take sulfur immediately after the arsenic pill. It eases the stomach and preserves your strength. Yet in a guarded corner of her ledger, she notes that some patients, particularly the elderly, complained of sulfurous belches that prompted mortified gasps at dinner parties. Scholars still argue whether sulfur co-treatment offered any real protective benefit or merely masked discomfort. You turn your attention to an elegant powder case labeled for gentle facials. A small spoon dispenses a fine white powder, almost indistinguishable from the arsenic pills. The label instructs mixing a thin paste with rose water for nightly face masks. Apocryphal salon diaries whisper that some women inadvertently applied arsenic paste too liberally, leading to local skin necrosis and dramatic scarring that required months of vinegar compresses to heal. Such fringe mishaps fueled the era's fascination with beauty's perilous edge, where cosmetic allure balanced dangerously on chemical trade-offs. On a nearby shelf, you notice a leather case stamped arsenic antidote, mild syrup of iron and vinegar. In mainstream remedy books, iron supplements were recommended to counteract arsenic-induced anemia, while vinegar acetic acid was thought to mobilize metal ions. A middle-aged gentleman, his cheeks faintly rumpled by age, retrieves the antidote case and demonstrates administering a teaspoon after a beauty pill. "I do this faithfully each evening," he says, "and I've felt no ill effects." Yet private correspondence between doctors reveals skepticism. Vinegar's chelation efficacy was marginal at best, and iron supplements could irritate the stomach, further compounding toxicity rather than alleviating it. Scholars still debate whether these antidotes ever truly neutralized arsenic's harm or simply provided a comforting ritual. As the lamplight flickers, you lift a final pill and let it dissolve slowly on your tongue, its chalky texture lingering like a promise of smoother skin. You feel a faint warmth behind your eyes, a physical effect or perhaps expectation's power. Outside, a chill wind rattles the window panes, and within the room's hush deepens to a reverent silence. The apothecary jars stand sentinel, their contents bridging an age of elegance with the daring chemistry of poison as beauty. Because for Victorians, arsenic beauty pills were not mere vanity potions. They were bold scientific gambits at the frontier of pharmacology and aesthetics, illuminating both the era's quest for perfection and its tolerance for peril, shaping modern dermatology in ways as vital as they were unnerving. You rise from the sideboard of beauty poisons and cross the sick room's threshold into a dimly lit alcove where a curious contraption hangs against a tapestry of ivy motifs. The room feels charged, as if the very air thrums with unseen currents. Here upon a polished oak stand rests the most sensational of Victorian medical novelties, the electric health belt. Its broad leather strap is studded with brass electrodes, wires coiled like curious serpents, leading to a brass-handled induction coil mounted on an ebony base. A coil's gentle hum fills your ears, a low mechanical song promising relief for every ache and malaise. Because now it is time for electric health belts. By the late 19th century, electrotherapy had entered mainstream Victorian practice, championed by pioneering physicians who believed that carefully applied electrical currents could stimulate muscles, invigorate nerves, and restore the body's vital magnetism. You watch Dr. Eleanor Ward, her white linen dress crisp and unadorned, adjust the belt around a patient's waist. She tightens the leather until the brass electrodes rest firmly against the skin, then cranks the small handle of the induction coil. A slender spark arcs between contacts. The belt tingles with a soft buzz, and you feel a faint prickling warmth as the current traverses the patient's abdomen. Dr. Ward explains in measured tones. These currents, just a few milliamps, enhance circulation, relieve menstrual cramps, and alleviate digestive sluggishness. This mainstream endorsement traces to published reports in the British Medical Journal documenting dozens of patients with chronic dyspepsia and neuralgia who reported significant improvement after a course of daily 20-minute belt treatments. Surgeons recommended belts for post-operative muscle atony, while gynecologists lauded their ability to ease uterine discomfort without resorting to narcotics. Yet in fringe circles, whispers circulated of more dramatic effects. A footnote in a traveling showman's brochure claims that one inventor's electromagnetic girdle generated such intense sensations that a heavily pregnant woman went into premature labor, or perhaps saved her from an even worse crisis. Accounts vary. Historians still debate whether any such premature births were genuine medical anomalies or lurid marketing tall tales designed to attract attention to traveling electrotherapy exhibits. You lean forward as Dr. Ward increases the current slightly. The patient's shoulders tense, then relax in a visible exhalation, eyes fluttering as though awakened from a dream. The belt's electrodes hum gently against her skin, and you sense how the rhythmic pulsing mimics the heartbeat, entraining tingles that spread like liquid warmth through the abdomen and lower back. Mainstream physiologists of the era pointed to galvanic stimulation's tonic effects on smooth muscles, citing improved peristalsis and relief from constipation. Yet notebooks in the Royal Society's archives contain skeptical jottings. Some researchers found no measurable increase in bowel motility, suggesting that any relief might stem from the patient's expectation or the belt's gentle massage effect rather than the current itself. Scholars still argue whether electrotherapy produced genuine physiological change or functioned largely as a high-tech placebo. Beside the induction coil lies a set of supplementary attachments. Small brass pads for the wrists and ankles, and a slender nasal speculum connected by fine wires. Dr. Ward picks up the wrist pads and demonstrates. For neuralgia of the hands and arms, we can direct the current locally, she says, placing each pad on the patient's forearms. The LEDs of the sparks dance more subtly here, and the patient's fingers twitch as if awakened from long dormancy. Mainstream neurologists reported that patients suffering from peripheral nerve pain, often dismissed as hysterical tremors, experienced remarkable relief, sometimes for days, after a single session. Yet a fringe treatise by a discredited practitioner extolled belts so powerful they galvanized life into withered limbs, an apparent exaggeration that left one patient with painful muscle spasms and a temporary loss of sensation. Historians still debate whether overzealous current levels ever caused genuine nerve damage, or whether such warnings served to temper the craze. Across the room, a line of waiting patients clutches calling cards, each eager for their turn under the belt's embrace. Among them is a stern-faced factory foreman, his work-worn hands gripping the edge of a chair. He admits in a gravelly whisper that he's tried every remedy for his chronic rheumatism, liniments, poultices, leeches. Yet nothing eased the deep ache in his joints. Now as the belt's current courses through his spine, he murmurs, "I feel lighter." Mainstream orthopedic surgeons began recommending belt therapy for joint stiffness and early arthritis, citing improved mobility in case studies. Yet orthopedic texts from the era also cautioned that repeated belt use without intervening rest sometimes exacerbated inflammation, suggesting a complex balance between therapeutic and abrasive electrical stimulation. Scholars still argue whether electrotherapy belonged in the physician's toolkit for rheumatism or if its benefits were outweighed by potential overuse injuries. A hush falls as the factory foreman's session ends. Dr. Ward switches off the coil and the electrodes release a soft click. He stands slowly flexing his shoulders and back then offers a grateful nod. Meanwhile, apprentices detangle the wires and wipe the patient's damp skin with aromatic alcohol, another mainstream detail as bonding electrodes often left residue that could irritate if not cleaned promptly. Yet a rogue apothecary's pamphlet claimed that rum-soaked cloths applied post-treatment intensified the belt's warming effect. An unverified practice historians debate as either early contrast therapy or foolhardy folk remedy. Your gaze drifts to a small plaque on the coil's base. Belts by Dr. John Wesley Hyson, 1892. Hyson, a real pioneer of galvanic medicine, patented his own design incorporating adjustable rheostats to control current intensity. His clinics drew queues of curious patients and skeptical colleagues alike. In mainstream medical society meetings, Hyson defended his devices with statistical charts of patient improvement, though critics pointed out small sample sizes and lack of placebo controls. Scholars still debate whether Hyson's data proved genuine electrotherapeutic benefits or reflected the era's nascent clinical research methods. As the lamp's glow softens, you sense the room's charged atmosphere settling into a gentle hush. The leather belt is wiped clean and hung ready for its next appointment. The induction coil's humming wires coiled like slumbering serpents. You feel the static echoes of current in your fingertips, even across the polished floorboards, a reminder of how electricity once promised a new frontier in healing. Because for Victorians, electric health belts were not mere gimmicks. They were cutting-edge instruments forged at the intersection of science industry and hope channels for unseen currents believed to restore the body's natural harmony long before modern physiotherapy found safer evidence-based ways to harness electricity's power. You follow the dim corridor past the hum of induction coils into a low-ceilinged chamber lined with polished oak cabinets and shelves laden with curious glass jars. A narrow table in the center bears a single display, a porcelain plate, on which sits a gelatin capsule. Its contents, a thin coiled shape, barely visible through the yellowed shell. Here in this hush of pharmaceutical daring, another Victorian health craze reveals itself, because now it is time for tapeworm weight loss diets. In mainstream Victorian medicine, The burgeoning obsession with slimness found a bizarre prescription: ingest a tapeworm larva on purpose. Let it mature inside your gut and nibble away at your calories from within. Popular diet manuals and sensational newspapers of the late 19th century recounted that Parisian naturopaths offered tapeworm pills, each containing a cystic embryo of Taenia saginata, for patients desperate to lose weight without arduous exercise or restrictive fasting. You watch the apothecary lift the small capsule with steel tweezers, its sheen reminiscent of a pearl caught in candlelight, and place it into a glass of clear water. Slowly the gelatin dissolves, releasing the tiny organism that would burrow into its unwitting host. A slender physician in a high-collared coat explains in a soft, deliberate tone, once the larva embeds in the intestinal wall and matures, it will absorb a fraction of ingested carbohydrates, promoting weight loss, typically 1 to 2 pounds per week. This mainstream endorsement drew on case reports published in the British Medical Journal, where doctors documented slimmer figures among affluent women who could quietly purchase tapeworm capsules through discreet apothecary networks. Testimonials boasted that after 6 weeks of infestation, ladies shed dresses 2 sizes down with minimal discomfort beyond occasional mild hunger and flatulence. Yet lurking beneath these clinical narratives lay fringe horrors. An undercover nurse's diary discovered in a provincial hospital archive recounts a patient who, overzealous in her regimen, retained the tapeworm for nearly 2 years, suffering chronic abdominal pain, nutrient deficiencies, and dizzy spells, before finally expelling the parasite in a dramatic early morning episode. Historians still argue whether such extreme cases were anomalies or indications that Victorian practitioners underestimated the dangers of self-infestation. You lean closer as the physician unscrews a brass vial labeled Taenia dieticus. He shows you a tiny ritual. A teaspoon of laudanum is administered immediately after ingestion to suppress initial nausea and discourage premature expulsion from vomiting. Mainstream medical advice cautioned a single dose of mild sedative to ease patient discomfort, though the combination of laudanum and a live parasite raised unsettling pharmacological questions. A footnote in an apothecary's ledger warns that too much opiate could slow intestinal motility, trapping the tapeworm head and risking intestinal obstruction, a fringe complication that Victorian surgeons occasionally encountered in emergency wards. In a hushed corner, a trio of curious visitors, 2 ladies in high-waisted gowns and a gentleman in a frock coat, whisper excitedly as they examine a faded newspaper clipping promoting the Taenia slimming cure. The clipping claims its inventor, Dr. Montague Wormsworth, saw no patients exceeding 20 pounds of weight loss in 4 months without notable side effects. Yet the same article's fine print warns of rare coughs, tapeworm segments expelled near the glottis skin, itchiness, allergic reaction to parasite antigens, and general malaise euphemisms hinting at deeper malaise. Scholars still debate whether Wormsworth's clinics carefully screened patients or simply followed profit-driven protocols. You notice on a nearby shelf another jar, this one labeled Tapeworm Expulsion Tonic. After 6 weeks of infestation, patients were instructed to take a powerful, cathartic concoction of castor oil and jalap water to purge the parasite. The physician opens the jar and sniffs the oil's grassy perfume. The final expulsion, he says quietly, is often the most uncomfortable cramps, diarrhea, and sometimes fear that the worm will cling too tightly. Mainstream instructions recommended clear broths and bed rest afterward, but private letters reveal patients sometimes endured fevers and protracted weakness before regaining normal digestive function. Historians still argue whether repeated infestations, common among those chasing ever thinner silhouettes, led to chronic malnutrition far beyond the intended slimming effect. Beyond the table, antique prints line the walls, showing anguished silhouettes of tapeworms, long segmented chains unfurling across the starchy background of white bodices, a macabre reminder that beauty could come at a living cost. A visiting socialite, her voice hushed, remarks, "They said it was the height of refinement, an invisible corset beneath the flesh." This fringe testimony hints at the psychological allure, a quiet pact with nature's darker side to maintain social status and delicate poise. You step back and feel the faint echo of parasitic life stirring in the air. The gelatin capsule once held by tweezers now rests empty in a glass dish, a testament to medical hubris and Victorian vanity. Outside, the wind rattles the sashes, and the sick room's hush deepens into a reverent stillness. Because for Victorians, tapeworm diet cures were not mere curiosities. They were emblematic of an age willing to embrace living parasites in pursuit of slender perfection, a testament to medicine's audacious experiments at the bounds of discomfort and desire. You step away from the hushed cabinet of tapeworm remedies and enter a cozy corner of the sick room warmed by the glow of a small hearth. A low table here is strewn with jars of crushed seeds, poultices, and plaster cloths, their pungent aroma of mustard oil and heat-tinged spice perfuming the air. Beside the hearth stands a wrought iron trivet, holding a shallow pan of simmering water. On a folded linen napkin rests a fresh mustard plaster, a pale yellow paste flecked with black mustard seed dust. In this snug alcove, another time-honored Victorian therapy unfolds, because now it is time for Mustard Plaster Poultices. By mainstream Victorian medical practice, mustard poultices mixed from powdered mustard seed flour and water were applied hot to the chest or back to relieve bronchitis, pneumonia, and muscular aches. The plaster's counter-irritant action drew blood to the skin's surface, thought to break up deep-seated congestion and stimulate healing. You lean forward as a nurse dips her fingers into the steaming pan, scoops a hearty dollop of paste onto a length of muslin, and folds it into a neat packet. The senior physician, seated in a high-backed armchair, nods approvingly. Place this over the sternum For 10 to 15 minutes, he instructs in a gentle voice. You'll feel warmth spreading inward. The chest's secretions will loosen, and breathing will ease. This mainstream approach appears in every 19th century medical text on respiratory care, with diagrams showing optimal placement and cautions to monitor the skin for excessive redness. Yet beyond measured guidance lay fringe accounts of mustard's more dramatic effects. A diary entry from a countryside doctor recorded that a patient frightened by the intense warmth ripped off a plaster prematurely, leaving a red, blistered imprint shaped like a dragon's wing across his back. Some patients joked that they emerged from mustard poultice sessions looking like circus performers in flame-painted bodices. Historians still argue whether such blistering was deemed an acceptable side effect or led to calls for gentler formulas among sensitive individuals. As the nurse presses the warm muslin packet onto your own chest, you feel a sharp spreading heat tingling beneath your shirt. Steam rises from the plaster's edges, curling in the hearth's glow. She wraps a layer of flannel around your torso to trap warmth, then steps back to observe. You inhale deeply, tasting the mustard's faintly biting aroma at the back of your throat. In mainstream pharmacy journals, variations on the mustard plaster abound. Some recipes added a few drops of laudanum to soothe pain, others mixed in vinegar or wine to modulate heat intensity. Popular home manuals even suggested sprinkling dried lavender into the paste for a calming scent. Yet a fringe household tip, preserved in a midwife's almanac, recommended adding crushed garlic, believed to enhance mustard's penetrating power, an odd coupling that, according to local lore, left more than one patient with a strangely garlic-tinged chest for days. Scholars still debate whether such additions ever gained genuine traction or remained offbeat folk experiments. You feel the paste's warmth crescendo, then ebb, as the physician marks the time on his pocket watch. Now he says softly, remove the plaster and apply a soothing lotion of almond oil and rose water to calm the skin. As the nurse peels away the damp cloth, you see the skin beneath flushed pink, the capillaries engorged but intact. She soaks a soft sponge in a fragrant concoction and gently wipes away residue. The physician examines the imprint and remarks, efficacious without true injury. A mild blister is acceptable, but never let the plaster scorch. His tone reminds you that mustard therapy was a balance of heat and healing. Yet scattered letters from insulted patients scribbled toasts of mustard in margins, complained of housemaids leaving scorch marks on fine garments, prompting laundresses to demand compensation. Historians still argue whether common domestic mishaps shaped the therapy's reputation beyond its medical merits. Beyond the immediate chest treatment, mustard poultices appeared in wider Victorian self-care, applied to joints for rheumatic relief, to the abdomen for menstrual cramps, to the temples for headaches, each use reflecting mustard's versatility. A midwife's guide from 1887 advised mustard plasters for labor pains, cautioning midwives to monitor both redness and patient comfort. Yet an obstetrician's note recounts one mother-to-be who, seeking relief, applied mustard too early in labor, only to find the strip burned her abdomen and disrupted contractions, an anecdote that fueled later debates over appropriate timing and application depth. Scholars still debate whether mustard's pain relief outweighed its potential to provoke unwanted muscular reactions. In the alcove's quiet, you run your fingers over the warming board and consider mustard's chemical sting, the volatile ally of Victorian healing that transformed spice into medicine. The hearth's crackle mingles with your steady breath, each inhale infused with pungent promise. Outside, the wind moans through eaves. Inside, the warmth settles deep in your lungs and limbs. Because for Victorians, mustard plaster poultices were not mere folk remedies. They were time-tested therapies forged in kitchens and clinics alike, blending simple chemistry with human resilience to soothe the gravest of chest ailments and the deepest of pains. You step out of the steam and spice of the mustard plaster alcove and into a cozy parlor lined with dark oak panels and shelves stocked with earthenware jugs. The scent of hops and barley hangs in the air, mingling with the faint tang of yeast. On a low table, nestled by a wingback chair, are tall tankards of dark porter and frothy stouts, each promising more than mere refreshment. Here, amidst the warm glow of gaslight and the low murmur of patrons, another Victorian health staple unfolds, because now it is time for beer-based blood tonics. In mainstream Victorian medical practice, especially for patients convalescing from illness or battling anemia, a glass of porter or its heartier cousin stout was prescribed as a blood tonic. Physicians of the era believed that brewers' yeast malt extract and dissolved iron from the brewing process conferred restorative properties, strengthening the blood-improving digestion and bolstering general vitality. Medical treatises praised porter's high caloric content and its B vitamin-rich yeast as ideal for feeble constitutions. You lift a heavy pewter tankard, feel its chill through your fingers, and take a cautious sip, the dark liquid rich, slightly sweet, and mysteriously nourishing. Dr. Clara Beaumont, seated across from you in a plush chair, nods approvingly. "A pint of porter daily," she asserts in a gentle voice, "supplies necessary calories, iron, and nourishment to patients too weak for solid food." This mainstream endorsement appears in numerous hospital formularies, which note measurable gains in hemoglobin levels among post-surgical patients and tuberculosis convalescents who consumed porter as part of their regimen. Gentlefolk recovering from delicate fevers found the drink easier on their stomachs than meat broths or heavy stews. Yet within these official accolades lies a fringe tale, a nascent temperance movement, skeptical of alcohol's virtues, circulated whispered warnings that porter's iron content varied wildly between breweries, leading to inconsistent therapeutic effects. A temperance pamphlet bluntly declared one brewer's strengthening stout may contain as much metal grit as true iron, implying that some tonics did more to polish teeth than to build blood. Historians still debate how much variation existed in Victorian brewing practices and whether temperance critiques reflected genuine health concerns or moral opposition to alcohol consumption. Beyond its use as a medical tonic, porter became a fashionable restorative at afternoon tea gatherings, an irony in an era of strict teetotalers masquerading as socialites. Ladies in tea gowns sipped small cups of nutritive ale as parlors discreetly repurposed teacups for porter when serving convalescent callers. In mainstream etiquette manuals, hosts were instructed to offer both tea and a weaker brew to accommodate every palate. Yet a fringe etiquette note cautioned that too many refreshments, tea, coffee, porter, and wine could overwhelm the system, leading to tonic overload and fatal fainting spells in extreme cases. Scholars still argue whether such fainting was a rare medical anomaly or a byproduct of Victorian overindulgence. At a nearby sideboard, you notice small bottles labeled Porter Essence, a concentrated syrupy extract of porter marketed for invalids who could only handle teaspoon doses. Its promoters claimed it delivered all the benefits of a full mug without the volume. A demonstration by a nurse shows a single teaspoon diluted in water producing a flavor reminiscent of burnt caramel. Mainstream case notes from private care homes report that bedbound patients could benefit from the extract's nutrients without the risk of choking or aspiration. Yet a marginal entry in a home nurse's notebook complains that the syrup's thickness often clogged feeding tubes, prompting frantic attempts to thin it with hot water. Historians still debate whether porter essence ever became a staple of hospital nutrition or remained a niche remedy for wealthy households. One corner of the parlor hosts a curious contraption, a portable porter. Stout dispenser, fashioned in polished brass, each pint served at a regulated temperature via a hand-operated pump. Invented by an enterprising apothecary in 1888, it found use in infirmaries and middle-class homes alike. A demonstration shows how a patient in bed could receive a fresh draft via a long rubber tube, much like modern enteral feeding systems. Mainstream medical journals lauded the dispenser's hygiene and convenience, especially in maternity wards. Yet insiders whispered that rubber tubing sometimes imparted a rubbery taste to the porter and required frequent sterilization with harsh chemicals irritating patients' noses and throats. Scholars still argue whether these logistical hurdles limited the device's widespread adoption. You raise your tankard as socialites, and invalids mingle doctors in black coats, offering measured advice, nurses in pristine white moving silently between chairs. Patrons share whispered success stories, robust color returning to cheeks, newfound energy for walks in the garden, and improved appetite for solid foods. A powdered advertisement pinned above the fireplace claims Porter, the doctor's own ale blood builder extraordinaire. Yet a small temperance placard at the room's edge proclaims better health through temperance, challenging Porter's medical reputation. This clash of viewpoints, mainstream medical endorsement versus moral temperance, illustrates the social tensions underlying even simple health tonics. As you drain the last golden brown drop, you feel a comforting warmth spread through your chest, not just from alcohol, but from the sense of society's caring arms. The lamp's soft glow flickers on the tankard's surface, mirroring the hearth's embers. Because for Victorians, beer-based blood tonics were not mere libations. They were nurturers of fragile constitutions, bridges between diet and medicine, and symbols of an age seeking nourishment in every pint, poised between the brewer's art and the physician's science. You rise from the hearth-lit parlor of Porter Tonics and step through a narrow corridor into the cool dusk air. Beyond the mansion's walls, you find yourself on a wide, graveled terrace overlooking rolling lawns and neatly clipped hedges. An open pavilion, its lattice sides framing distant oaks, beckons you onward. Here, the Victorian cure that most embraced nature itself awaits, because now it is time for open-air sanatoria. By the late 19th century, mainstream medicine had come to recognize that fresh air, abundant sunlight, and moderate exercise were as vital to health as any tonic or so sanatorium physicians proclaimed in journals and pamphlets. Tuberculosis. Then the century's scourge seemed to retreat before the combined forces of elevated pavilions, wide verandas, and brisk promenades. You step onto the covered veranda, its wide boards cool beneath your boots, and inhale the crisp evening breeze tinged with pine. A low bench, its cushions neatly turned, invites you to sit and survey the grounds. Dr. Madeline Harlow, chief physician of the Greenwood Open Air Sanatorium, approaches in her white frock, hands clasped at her waist. Take deep breaths of the evening air, she gently instructs, her voice carrying on the breeze. Our patients spend at least 8 hours daily on these terraces resting, reading, even napping, believing that open-air exposure slows tuberculosis's progress and bolsters general health. This mainstream recommendation was underpinned by studies in Germany and Switzerland showing improved outcomes among sanatorium patients who adhered to rest and gentle exercise in open-air settings. Beneath the veranda, wicker chairs and tables set at comfortable intervals hold piles of novels, newspapers, and knitting baskets, an inviting tableau for convalescence. You watch as a thin young woman in a light shawl settles into a chair, loosens her corset, and reaches for a steaming cup of chamomile tea from a passing nurse. A mild cough escapes her lips, but her eyes are brighter, her cheeks faintly warmed by the evening chill. Mainstream physicians noted that nightly exposure to cool, clean air, free of urban pollutants, helped ease bronchial inflammation and improved sleep quality. Yet some skeptics argued that too much cold could provoke chills, risking pneumonia in weakened lungs. Historians still debate how precisely physicians balanced hours of exposure with patients' tolerance for cold. On the terrace's far edge, a circle of white stones marks the starting point of the promenade path. Patients are encouraged to walk its gently sloping route at dawn daylight, filtering through the trees in gold shafts. You step onto the path's gravel, noting its precise grade, carefully engineered to provide mild exertion without fatigue. We prescribe 30 minutes of walking each morning, Dr. Harlow explains. Movement stimulates circulation without taxing the lungs. In mainstream sanatorium records, such controlled exercise regimens correlated with increased appetite and weight gain in many patients. Yet a fringe anecdote in a nurse's log catalogs the one unfortunate patient who in overexuberance tripped on the promenade's gentle incline and sprained an ankle, requiring a temporary return to bed rest. Scholars still debate whether such mishaps deterred exercise prescriptions or prompted adjustments to the path's design. Beyond the path, you glimpse clusters of small, white-roofed cottages dotting the lawn, private fresh air rooms where wealthier patients slept outdoors, even on chilly nights. Each cottage contains a simple iron bedstead, heavy woolen blankets, and flannel nightgowns. The roof opens like a lantern, Dr. Harlow points out, touching a wooden lever that swings back slats overhead. She continues, sleeping under the stars was considered essential. Patients reported deeper, more restful sleep, awakened only by gentle moonlight rather than indoor gaslight glows. Mainstream sleep studies of the time, measured by patient journals rather than precise instruments, suggested that fresh air sleepers awoke fewer times at night and felt more alert by morning. Yet domestic correspondents complained of frost-nipped toes and the occasional startled owl hoot. Historians still argue whether open-roof cottages remained an elite novelty or widespread practice among mid-tier sanatoria. As the sun dips lower, turning the sky to dusky rose, you notice a small infirmary hut where Dr. Harlow sometimes provides light therapy sessions using early ultraviolet lamps. She explains sunlight's ultraviolet rays have bactericidal properties and can help sterilize wounds or treat superficial skin infections. This fringe extension of open-air therapy anticipated later phototherapy for rickets and psoriasis. Yet a nurse's notebook jottings caution that overexposure to UV lamps sometimes caused erythema skin redness akin to sunburn. Scholars still debate whether early UV treatments offered genuine benefit or risked creating new dermal issues. A gentle bell rings to signal evening assembly. Patients and staff gather on the veranda for a brief communal gathering, reading aloud favorite passages, singing simple songs, or listening to Dr. Harlow's scheduled health talk. Tonight, her topic is the air and the lungs, wherein she cites mainstream respiratory studies demonstrating that outdoor air low in urban soot reduced pulmonary distress and improved lung capacity over weeks of therapy. Listeners lean forward, breath visible in the cooling air, their pale faces softening with hope. Yet within these assemblies lingered fringe superstitions. Some patients staked herbs, mugwort, horehound, even foxglove around their chalet windows to ward off miasmas they believed responsible for consumption's contagion. While mainstream germ theory began displacing miasma theory, by the century's end, many sanatoria retained both windows open and protective herb bundles at cottage doors. Historians still debate how fully miasma beliefs faded among practitioners versus persisting in popular practice. As twilight settles into night, you stroll along the promenade path, moonlight winking between oak branches. The air cools further, and you wrap your shawl tighter, feeling lungs fill with freshness, unfiltered by chimneys or coal dust. The gentle murmur of fellow patients and the rustle of leaves create a lullaby more potent than any medicine. Because for Victorians, open-air sanatoria were not mere retreats. They were living laboratories where nature itself became a physician, where fresh air, gentle exercise, and communal support wove together into a therapeutic tapestry designed to outmatch disease in both body and spirit. Stepping down from the open-air pavilion of fresh air cures, you find yourself in a lamp-lit chamber lined with thick velvet drapes and satin-smoothed divans. Against one wall stands a polished oak cabinet filled with gleaming glass inhalers, each connected by slender rubber hoses to a brass manifold. Above the manifold, a sign reads, "Oxygen inhalation, parlor, breathe deeply, revive fully." Here, amid hushed conversation and the soft hiss of gas, unfolds another Victorian remedy, because now it is time for oxygen bars and inhalation therapy. By the late 19th century, mainstream physicians had begun isolating and bottling oxygen, then promoting its inhalation to treat everything from chronic bronchitis and asthma to general lassitude and neurasthenia. Medical journals reported patients who, after a 15-minute inhalation session, experienced clearer breathing and a flush of renewed vigor. You step forward as an attendant in a crisp white coat unclamps the regulator valve. A gentle hiss fills the parlor, and a pale mist spills from brass outlets into delicate glass bulbs. A harpist's soft strains float through the room as the attendant places a bulb at a waiting patron's lips. The patron, a middle-aged gentleman with a gaunt face, inhales deeply. You watch his chest rise and fall with deeper amplitude. After a few breaths, His pallor softens to a healthier hue, and he exhales with a contented sigh. The attendant explains in a soft voice. Inhale 4 deep breaths every minute for 15 minutes. Oxygen enriches the blood, reduces headaches, and eases shortness of breath. This mainstream protocol was grounded in early physiologic studies showing that supplemental oxygen could temporarily improve arterial oxygen saturation and relieve hypoxia symptoms in patients with lung disease. Yet alongside these measured benefits lay fringe anecdotes of overuse. A footnote in a young doctor's notebook warns of grand ladies who, addicted to the bright air, spent hours inhaling until they felt lightheaded as spirits. Some reportedly experienced transient euphoria, what newspapers dubbed the high of the airs, prompting operetta parodies of ladies swooning in inhalation parlors. Historians still debate whether such recreational misuse was widespread or largely confined to bohemian circles experimenting with novel sensations. Nearby, a couple of patients recline on plush chairs, each holding a porcelain inhaler mask fitted snugly around the nose and mouth. A nurse circulates, offering chilled towels and cups of lemonade to those feeling lightheaded. Second-year medical students, tethered to the manifold by long rubber tubes, hurriedly copy case notes. One notes, a subject's respiration slowed after repeated inhalations. Another records sensation of tingling extremities in a patient with neurasthenia. Scholars still argue whether these subjective reports indicated genuine therapeutic nerve stimulation or early signs of hyperoxia's side effects. The parlor's far corner houses a demonstration of therapeutic gas blends. A brass cylinder labeled oxygen and helium mix stands beside one marked oxygen and carbon dioxide circulatory tonic. The attendant opens the helium blend and allows a small group to sample the light, almost weightless air. Voices emerge with curious pitch-high, almost childlike giggles, eliciting subdued laughter among patrons. This fringe spectacle underscores the era's experimental spirit. Physicians theorized helium's low density might ease airflow in constricted bronchi, and small doses of carbon dioxide purportedly stimulated the respiratory center. Yet modern studies would later find such blends offered little genuine advantage over pure oxygen. Historians still debate whether these gas cocktails ever enjoyed significant clinical adoption or survived mainly as parlor curiosities. You wander to a side table where colorful cards outline pricing, 15-minute sessions for 1 shilling, half-hour deluxe treatments for 2, and subscription plans offering daily inhalations priced by guinea. The cost placed oxygen bars within reach of the comfortable middle class, but still out of favor with poorer patients. Victorian periodicals sometimes featured letters from working-class readers lamenting the therapy's expense, while sympathetic doctors advocated for hospital-based oxygen rooms funded by charitable subscriptions. Scholars still argue how socioeconomic access shaped oxygen therapy's reputation as both modern medical marvel and fashionable luxury. On a marble pedestal in the center of the room stands a life-sized copper statue of Hippocrates' hand raised as if distributing air. At the statue's base, a plaque quotes early oxygen advocates. In this gas lies the breath of life renewed. Patrons paused here for reverent seconds before their sessions, a fringe ritual hinting at the quasi-religious aura that surrounded new medical technologies. Historians still debate whether such theatrics enhanced patient belief and placebo effect or veered into pseudo-scientific ceremony. As the evening wanes, you notice that the attendants swap the oxygen tanks as gauges click red, ensuring a steady supply. The parlor's manager, a stiff-collared gentleman with a neat mustache, checks a logbook tracking session durations and patient demographics. He notes that the most frequent visitors include lung disease sufferers, fatigued scholars, and elderly patrons seeking relief from chronic rheumatism. Mainstream reports confirm that even limited sessions produce transient analgesic effects in arthritic patients, though lasting relief required repeated visits. Finally, you are invited to try the therapy yourself. The attendant adjusts your mask, and you breathe in the cool, pure air filling your lungs with effortless ease. You exhale, feeling worldly burdens lighten as though carried away on an unseen breeze. Outside, night has fallen, and the parlor's lamps glow warmly. Inside, the oxygen's whisper lingers in your throat. Because for Victorians, oxygen bars and inhalation therapy were not mere fads. They were tangible expressions of modern scientific optimism, affordable, airborne remedies to revitalize bodies and spirits alike, and precursors to today's respiratory care, where life's breath is measured in more precise metrics, but no less precious. You leave the oxygen parlor's hush behind and step into a circular chamber bathed in amber lamplight. On a low table stands a cluster of dark glass jars, each housing a small wooden box marked live leeches for hirudotherapy. A nurse in a starched white apron lifts a slender glass phial containing tiny wriggling aquatic worms. Here in this chamber of cautious revival unfolds another Victorian marvel, because now it is time for live leeches and hirudotherapy. By the mid to late 19th century, mainstream physicians embraced leech therapy, hirudotherapy, as a means of bloodletting with precision. Mounted on a sterile board, leeches were applied to targeted areas to the temple for headaches, the chest for congestive issues, or the joint for rheumatic pain. You watch as the nurse gently transfers a leech from its phial onto a pale patient's forearm. The leech attaches its sucker, forming an almost imperceptible seal and you see a tiny droplet of blood appear as it begins to feed. Dr. Samuel Whitcomb, noted for his promotion of modern phlebotomy, explains softly, leeches secrete hirudin, an anticoagulant, which ensures gradual, controlled blood removal far safer than crude venesection. Mainstream hospital reports recorded favorable outcomes in patients with varicose veins. Thrombosis risk and certain neuralgias, attributing relief to both blood volume reduction and local anti-inflammatory effects. Yet alongside these endorsements lay fringe tales of misadventure. In a nurse's private diary, one patient complained that a misplaced leech had wandered toward the crook of her elbow, causing an unnerving tickling sensation until it was retrieved with vinegar. Others joked of leech escapees slipping into bedding, prompting midnight hunts amid silken sheets. Historians still debate whether such mishaps were common nuisance events or apocryphal anecdotes amplified by Victorian fascination with the grotesque. On a side table, a cluster of empty small vials bears hand-scrawled labels, used leeches, do not discard, destined for leech farms, where they'd be rejuvenated on animal blood. This mainstream practice reflected both economic frugality and ecological awareness. Victorian apothecaries often recharged leeches several times before retiring them. Yet a margin note in an apothecary ledger warns that some farms reused leeches too long, resulting in lethargic specimens that fed poorly, prompting late-night orders for fresh stock from continental suppliers. Scholars still argue how regulatory oversight managed the quality and welfare of these medicinal worms. You observe as the leech feeds its body, engorging slowly over 15 to 20 minutes. The nurse dabs a compress of cold saline to soothe the sight afterward. Patients report a sense of lightness, and tension release mainstream evidence supporting leech use in relieving localized venous congestion. Yet Victorian critics cautioned against overuse. Too many leeches risked anemia, protracted bleeding, or infection, concerns later validated by advances in antiseptic practice. Historians still debate whether early antiseptic methods sufficiently protected patients from secondary infections following leech bites. Beyond the direct application, leech therapy entered popular culture. Ladies' salons sometimes kept boxed leeches on display, exotic curiosities of living medicine, while medical students sketched their anatomy in notebooks. A fringe engraving circulated showing a leech cask, a fine wooden barrel designed to transport leeches discreetly to high society patients. Whether such barrels were widespread or merely fanciful designs remains contested among medical historians. As the feeding leech detaches its body swollen like a dark grape, it leaves behind a neat, anticoagulated trickle, soon staunched with a soothing astringent. You feel the patient's sigh of relief. the room's charged anticipation dissolving into quiet contentment. The nurse gently collects the leech for return to its phial, and you sense the cycle of life and healing entwined in that tiny creature. Because for Victorians, leeches were not mere relics of antiquated bloodletting. They were precision instruments of controlled healing, bridging ancient practice and modern antiseptic advances, offering a living testament to medicine's evolving understanding of blood biology and balance. You step out of the leech chamber's soft lamplight and into a smaller, brighter room where a series of arc lamps stand on tripod mounts, their wire cages glowing with pale electric light. The walls are painted a reflective white to magnify the illumination. Against one wall, you see a simple wooden cot draped in white linen. A young attendant adjusts a large hood-shaped lamp, its curved glass face positioned just inches above the cot's mattress. Here, in this shrine to modern science, unfolds another bold Victorian therapy, because now it is time for sun lamp rickets cures. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, rickets, a disease caused by vitamin D deficiency, leading to bone deformities, afflicted countless impoverished children in smog-filled industrial cities. Mainstream public health advocates and pioneering physicians began prescribing electric sun lamps that emitted ultraviolet rays mimicking the healing qualities of natural sunshine. You watch as an attendant lowers the lamp's reflector hood to frame a small child's torso and limbs the faint violet glow bathing the skin in a warm, ethereal light. Dr. Alice Farrington, a specialist in pediatric bone diseases, stands by with protective goggles. 10 minutes of exposure 3 times weekly, she instructs, will stimulate endogenous vitamin D synthesis in the skin, improving calcium absorption and promoting healthy bone growth. This mainstream protocol drew on emerging photobiology studies showing that UV light converted skin sterols into vitamin D precursors, a discovery that would later earn widespread scientific acclaim. Hospital records from London's East End infirmaries report measurable improvements: bowed legs, straightened pelvic deformities diminished, and patients reported less bone pain. Yet among the hopeful testimonies lie fringe anecdotes. One nurse's journal describes a patient who, after prolonged exposure, emerged with pronounced freckles and a sunburn-like rash, novel side effects of artificial UV therapy. Some attendants improvised by adding mirrors to intensify the light, only to cause blistering on delicate skin. Historians still debate whether early lamp designs provided safe UV dosages or risked overexposure in the era before standardized irradiation equipment. Beyond hospital wards, sanatoriums and private clinics installed sun lamp parlors. Wealthy mothers brought their children for sun treatments in urban basements converted into faux solariums, complete with wicker chairs and potted palms. Mainstream medical magazines featured articles praising these facilities as life-saving retreats for city-bound youngsters. Yet social critics scoffed that such remedies catered only to families who could afford electric bills and specialized care, leaving the poorest sufferers reliant on meager rooftop heliotherapy or coal soot-choked air. You observe as Dr. Farrington gently rotates the child's arm under the lamp, speaking softly to calm any fear. The child's skin glistens faintly where UV light meets perspiration, and you sense the promise of restored health in the room's hush. Protective screens of nitrate-coated glass filter out harmful infrared rays, though anecdotal notes from the clinic archives warn that some installers used ordinary glass, risking thermal burns under the intense bulbs. Scholars still argue if early safety standards kept pace with therapeutic ambitions or lagged dangerously behind. A small chart on the wall tracks weekly progress, height gains, bone curvature angles, and appetite improvements. Parents watch anxiously as their children emerge from exposure sessions, cheeks flushed but eyes bright. Mainstream pediatricians lauded these early results, while nutritional experts cautioned that UV therapy worked best when paired with dietary calcium and cod liver oil, another popular rickets cure of the era. Yet fringe advocates sometimes omitted dietary advice, resulting in mixed outcomes and fueling debates over the primacy of light versus nutrition in bone health. The parlor also houses a demonstration of an image-casting sun lamp intended to project the sun's disk onto the wall, a visual spectacle meant to reassure patients of the treatment's authenticity. A technician cranks a lever, and the lamp's optics produce a bright, circular glow, complete with faint central flare. Children giggle at the sun on demand, while adults marvel at human ingenuity. This fringe device, though popular in promotional photographs, saw limited clinical use, and historians still debate whether it served any therapeutic purpose or existed purely for showmanship. As dusk deepens, you step back, leaving the child under the lamp's gentle glow. The chamber's warmth and radiance feel like a promise that even in the heart of smoky cities, doctors could summon sunshine at will. Outside, gaslights flicker in the fog, and city life hums beyond the clinic's brick walls. Inside, the sun lamp's violet radiance stands as a symbol of hope, science, and the enduring human quest to harness nature's power for healing, because for Victorians, sun lamp rickets cures were not mere gadgets. They were pioneering bridges between nature and technology, offering light to the afflicted in concrete doses and laying the groundwork for modern phototherapy that continues to illuminate medicine today. You step from the gentle glow of sun lamps into a hushed consultation room lined with dark cherry wood panels and shelves laden with apothecary bottles. The air here is thick with the mingled aromas of brandy, herbal tinctures, and the faint, sweet tang of opium. On a polished oak desk rests a small silver-lined tray bearing a vial of golden syrup labeled laudanum, tincture of opium, and a slender crystal phial marked morphine sulfate. Here, amid the hush of whispered confidences and the soft click of glass against wood, unfolds the final and perhaps most potent chapter of Victorian therapeutics. Because now it is time for morphine and laudanum remedies. By the late 19th century, mainstream physicians recognized morphine and its parent tincture laudanum as unparalleled analgesics and sedatives. In Victorian hospitals and at-home dispensaries alike, laudanum, roughly 10 milligrams morphine per teaspoon, was prescribed for everything from severe coughs and diarrhea to neuralgic pain and insomnia. Morphine sulfate, isolated in 1804 and refined by mid-century, offered a more controlled, purer dose. A single grain, approximately 65 milligrams, could induce deep sleep or quell excruciating agony following surgery or injury. You watch Dr. Evelyn Cartwright, a pioneer in palliative care, draw exactly 5 minims of morphine tincture into a graduated glass syringe. Her patient, a tormented railway worker suffering from chronic joint pain, sits wrapped in a woolen shawl. In a calm voice, she explains, a single dose will relieve pain for 6 to 8 hours and help you rest. We'll monitor for nausea or dizziness, but generally morphine is safe under careful supervision. Mainstream medical journals brimmed with case studies praising morphine's reliability. Battlefield surgeons administered it in cavalry ambulances, while midwives used measured doses to ease childbirth pain. Patients describe morphine's effect as a gentle veil of oblivion, a transition from agony to quiet repose. Yet alongside medical praise, a sober note of caution emerged. Editors warned of tolerance buildup, recommending that dosages be reduced gradually to avert withdrawal. Beyond official endorsements lay fringe anecdotes of laudanum's lure. Literary figures, poets, painters, and bohemians sought laudanum's dreamlike euphoria, chronicling fantastical hallucinations in private journals. A hazy entry by a declining novelist, scribbled at midnight under dim candlelight, describes opium dreams of sailing seas of mercury and conversing with ancient gods. Scholars still debate whether literary accounts reflected common recreational use or isolated creative excess among the era's avant-garde. In the corner stands a delicate opium pop jar, small lozenges infused with powdered opium and sugar marketed as cough suppressants, safe for children over age 12. A nurse retrieves one for a child hacking from bronchitis. Dissolve on the tongue twice daily, she instructs softly. This mainstream pediatric use, however, sparked controversy. A temperance pamphlet denounced child opium as a slow poison, accusing unscrupulous apothecaries of luring parents into unwittingly addicting their offspring. Historians still debate how widespread pediatric opiate dosing truly was, and how many children suffered dependence. You lean forward as Dr. Cartwright administers the morphine. The railway worker's tense shoulders relax in a visible exhale, the furrows of pain smoothing from his brow. Despite morphine's efficacy, fringe case reports in obscure provincial medical newsletters recounted rare incidents of respiratory depression so severe that nurses had to rouse comatose patients with smelling salts. These accounts foreshadowed later developments in overdose management that Victorian medicine had yet to master. Adjacent to the morphine and laudanums sits a small, lacquered box labeled Cocaine and Morphine Mixture, Mrs. Winthrop's Tonic. This proprietary blend promised both stimulant and sedative effects, a mainstream novelty among patent medicine circles. One pamphlet touted it as the cure for neuralgia, hysteria, and general languor, though pharmacologists quickly cautioned that mixing stimulants and depressants could confuse the nervous system's responses. A fragmentary note in a pharmacopoeial margin snarks. Results in sleepless nights, followed by comatose days, capturing the era's fascination with and ignorance of polypharmacy risks. Scholars still argue whether these concoctions offered genuine therapeutic benefit or functioned mainly as profit-driven curiosities. The room's hush deepens as Dr. Cartwright retrieves a small vial of synthetic codeine, a derivative of morphine introduced in the 1880s. Codeine's milder profile and lower addiction risk made it popular for chronic coughs. She measures a modest dose and administers it to the worker's daughter, whose night cough has kept the household awake. Mainstream pediatricians embraced codeine as a safer alternative to laudanum for children, though some medical critics argued that any opiate use in youth carried unacceptable risk. Historians still debate how regulatory attitudes toward pediatric codeine evolved from Victorian hesitancy to modern caution. In a quiet corner, a framed lithograph depicts the opium den of colonial cities. Dark rooms lit by flickering lamps where addicts clustered for their next dose. Though these dens lay outside respectable domestic medicine, their very existence shaped Victorian drug policies. Fringe reformers lobbied Parliament, citing public health dangers and demanding regulation. The 1868 Pharmacy Act began to curb over-the-counter opiate sales, marking the start of legal restrictions. Scholars still debate whether Victorian regulatory efforts were effective or too slow to stem widespread addiction. As the railway worker's pain recedes and his breathing eases, he grips Dr. Cartwright's hand in gratitude. You feel the morphine's power not just as a clinical tool, but as a testament to modern chemistry's ability to transform poppy juices into precision medicine. Yet you also sense the era's darker shadow addiction, tolerance overdose, unregulated patent elixirs and the moral panic they inspired. Because for Victorians, morphine and laudanum were not mere anesthetics. They were both miracles and menaces at medicine's frontiers, forging the path for modern analgesia, addiction science, and drug regulation in ways that still resonate in today's balance between relief and risk. You step from the apothecary's hush of opiate tinctures into a bright sunlit study where shelves of medical treatises and framed patent labels line oak-paneled walls. A polished mahogany desk holds a modern typewriter, stacks of scientific journals, and a curious glass box containing miniature models of foxglove blooms, radium springs, and tiny leech jars. Here in this room of reflection and record the era's boldest experiments converge into their long-term legacy. Because now it is time for Victorian cures in modern medicine. In mainstream medical history, many of the Victorian era's daring and sometimes dangerous remedies laid the groundwork for therapies we still use today. The cardiac glycoside Digitalis, once harnessed from foxglove tinctures, evolved into purified digoxin formulations that remain a staple in managing heart failure, its therapeutic index now calibrated by precise blood assays. As you leaf through a modern pharmacology journal, on the desk, you note articles confirming Digitalis's ongoing role, albeit with fewer reports of yellow halo vision. Historians still debate whether early dosing controversies accelerated development of safer cardiac drugs. Beside the journal lies a folder on phototherapy, tracing a line from the era's rudimentary sun lamps for rickets to today's UVB lamps used in psoriasis and vitamin D deficiency prevention. Controlled studies confirm that narrow-band UVB exposures administered under medical supervision can safely induce vitamin D synthesis without the burns once common under Victorian hoods. Yet fringe footnotes in early 20th century dermatology texts wondered whether electric lamps' heat risks outweighed benefits, a debate echoed when modern devices incorporate sensors to prevent overexposure. Scholars still argue how Victorian pioneers weighed risk versus innovation in early phototherapy. A framed certificate on the wall honors the Curie's later work, underscoring radium's tragic trajectory once hailed in spa waters, and patent tonic's radium's therapeutic promise gave way to stringent radiation safety standards and the rise of modern radiotherapy. Today's linear accelerators deliver high-energy beams with millimeter precision to treat cancer and evolution from chlorine gas-lit rooms of radium baths. Yet medical historians still debate whether Victorian spa enthusiasts unwittingly advanced knowledge of radiation's dangers, prompting later protocols for shielding and dosage. On a nearby shelf stands a small display of paralytic and analgesic drugs, morphine vials, codeine syrup bottles, and a modern naloxone kit. Victorian laudanum and morphine were the first potent opioids studied for pain relief. Their legacy persists in today's pharmacology, where opioid receptor agonists are carefully balanced against addiction risks. A pharmacovigilance report sits open detailing how understanding tolerance and withdrawal, first noted in 19th century military hospitals, shaped regulations culminating in the Controlled Substances Act. Historians still debate the Victorian period's role in seeding both analgesic innovation and the chronic pain opioid crisis. Next to these sits a pair of bottles that once held live leeches, remnants of Radium-Therapy. Though largely abandoned in the 20th century, leeches have resurged in microsurgery to relieve venous congestion in skin flaps and reattach digits. Modern leech farms supply Hirudo medicinalis under sterile conditions, and FDA approval governs medical-grade leeches. Yet a fringe question lingers. Did Victorian reuse practices, leech recharging on multiple patients, contribute to early understanding of transmissible infections, prompting antiseptic advances? Scholars still argue whether Victorian leech lore anticipated later protocols for single-use medical devices and universal precautions. A sleek wearable device, a modern transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulator, TENS rests beside an original Victorian electric belt. Both deliver currents through the skin, yet TENS units allow microamp adjustments, preset waveforms, and built-in overload protection. Physical therapists still debate whether TENS's efficacy in chronic pain surpasses placebo, echoing early Victorian debates about electrotherapy's true physiological impact. The continuity underscores how empirical curiosity fringe experiments with belts spurred bioelectricity's integration into rehabilitative medicine. On the desk's corner lies an empty gelatin capsule beside a pamphlet on tapeworm antigen vaccines. Though self-infestation has vanished from medical practice, parasitology today explores helminth-derived molecules for immune modulation, seeking to treat autoimmune diseases by harnessing controlled worm secretions. In a modern research paper, scientists reference Victorian tapeworm diets as inadvertent early immunotherapy, noting that low-grade infestations modulated host inflammatory responses. Historians still debate whether Victorian parasite-based weight loss truly inspired contemporary helminthic therapy or remains a coincidental parallel. Finally, you pick up a well-worn Victorian patent atlas showing mustard plaster recipes and cold cream formulas. Though mustard plasters faded from mainstream practice, topical counter-irritants, capsaicin creams derived from chili peppers have become accepted treatments for neuropathic pain, working on principles akin to mustard's heat induction. Physical medicine textbooks note the kinship stimulating superficial sensory receptors to alleviate deeper discomfort. Scholars still argue Whether Victorian mustard therapy's foundations directly inspired modern topical analgesics or simply shared convergent logic. As you survey the room spanning foxglove vials to leech jars, sun lamps to oxygen tanks, you sense a continuum of medical daring. Victorian practitioners, driven by curiosity and urgency, embraced poisons, parasites, and electricity to conquer maladies that sanatoria, pharmacies, and parlors tried to tame. Their successes paved the way for standardized pharmacology, radiation, oncology, pain management, and rehabilitative technologies. Their missteps prompted safety regulations, dosage protocols, and research ethics that define modern medicine. Because for modern medicine, Victorian health cures were not mere historical curiosities. They were the crucible in which we forged the tools, concepts, and cautionary tales that continue to shape science therapy and the delicate balance between innovation and safety in healing. The study's lamplight dims as you close the journal on Victorian Cure's legacy. Breathe slowly and let the room's soft shadows cradle you. Imagine each remedy, from Foxglove's golden tincture to Sunlamp's violet radiance, melting away like candles drained at the wick's end. Feel the pulse of history slow to a gentle rhythm. Recall the warmth of the porter tonic, the gentle tingle of electric belts, the soft tug of leeches, and the steely promise of tapeworm capsules. Each in its time bridged fear and hope, forging paths toward modern therapies. Yet now those bold experiments rest in the hush of our collective memory, their echoes woven into every heartbeat and every breath. As you settle deeper into sleep's embrace, let these whispers of Victorian ingenuity fade into a tranquil reverie. Picture the sanatorium veranda under moonlit skies, the tapering glow of sun lamps, the hush of oxygen's gentle hiss. Each scene, soft and distant, guides you downward away from the day's burdens into a realm where science and dream entwine. Your eyelids grow heavy as the flicker of modern devices dims to starlight. The tang of mustard, the hush of leech chambers, the distant murmurs of medical halls all drift away like petals on a slow river. In their place, only calm remains. Rest now in the legacy of those who dared to heal with courage and curiosity. May their pioneer spirits guard your dreams, and may the soft currents of sleep carry you to dawn's gentle promise. Good night and sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.